I was born in the spring of 1857 in New York City. My mother was Irish and came over during the famine years. My father was a laborer who worked on the docks when there was work available. I was the second of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. My older brother died of cholera when he was 4 in 1859. I was 2 years old and do not remember him. My mother spoke of him sometimes and said he had red hair like hers. We lived in a tenement on the Lower East Side. 5 families shared one privy. The rooms were dark and wet. The walls ran with moisture in winter. My father drank most of the money he earned. My mother took in washing when she could, though there was little water and even less soap. We were hungry most days. I remember hunger as a steady companion of my childhood, more familiar than comfort or safety. My father died in 1863 when I was 6 years old. He fell from a loading dock while drunk and broke his neck. They brought his body home, and my mother cried. I do not know if she cried for him or for the knowledge that we were now without any support at all. My mother tried to keep us together. She took in more washing and worked herself nearly to death. But there were 5 children to feed, clothe, and shelter. My older sister Margaret was 8 years old. I was 6. My younger brothers were 4 and 2, and my baby sister was just past 1 year old. In the winter of 1864, my mother became sick. She had been coughing for months, but that winter it grew worse. There was blood on the handkerchief and a fever that would not break. I know now it was consumption. At that time I knew only that my mother was dying, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. She died in February of 1864. I was not yet 7 years old. The city took us children. They said we were orphans now. They said they would find homes for us. They said we would be cared for. They were lying, but I did not know that then. They took us to an orphanage run by the Children's Aid Society. It was a large building, cold and plain. There were near 100 children there, maybe more. We were fed thin gruel and bread. We slept in rows of narrow cots. The staff were not cruel, but they were not kind either. They were simply managing a problem, and we were the problem being managed. I was there for 3 months. Margaret tried to keep us together and tried to mother the younger ones, but the staff separated us. Boys in one dormitory, girls in another. The little ones cried at night. I could hear them through the walls. I learned quickly that crying brought no comfort, only impatience from the staff. I learned to be quiet. In May of 1864, they gathered a group of us and told us we were going on a train. They said we were going west, a farming country where good Christian families wanted children. They said we would have new homes, new parents, food and clothing and kindness. They made it sound like a blessing. They made it sound like rescue. There were near 40 of us on that train, children from 5 years old to 15. We were dressed in the best clothing the orphanage had, clean but worn, patched but neat. They wanted us to look worth taking. They wanted us to look useful. We stopped in small towns across New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. At each stop, we were taken to a public building, a church, a town hall, or a school. Local families came to look at us. We were made to stand in a line while they examined us like animals at a market. They looked at our teeth, felt our arms to judge strength, asked our ages, and whether we were healthy. Some families wanted small children they could raise as their own. Others wanted older children, especially boys who could work. The prettier girls were chosen quickly by families who wanted daughters. The rest of us, plain and ordinary, waited to be chosen or turned away. I was chosen in Illinois in a town called Mansfield. It was our 5th stop. I was 7 years old. The family that took me was named Brennan, Thomas and Harriet Brennan. They had a farm outside of town, near 200 acres of corn and wheat. They were in their 40s and had no children of their own, though Harriet had been pregnant twice and lost both babies. Thomas Brennan looked me over like I was a mule he was thinking of buying. He asked if I was strong. I said yes, though I did not know if I was strong. He asked if I could work. I said yes. He asked if I was obedient. I said yes. He asked if I was obedient. I never saw any of my siblings again. Margaret had been taken at the first stop in New York. My brothers were taken in Ohio. My baby sister was taken in Indiana. The Children's Aid Society kept no system for keeping siblings together and no clear records of where children were placed. We were scattered across the Midwest like seeds thrown into the wind, and we never found one another again. The Brennan farm was 10 miles from town, a wooden farmhouse, a barn, and fields stretching in every direction. It looked calm from the road. It was not calm. They put me to work the morning after we arrived. Harriet woke me before dawn and told me my duties. I was to help with cooking, cleaning, washing, mending, churning, gardening, and feeding the chickens and pigs. During planting and harvest, I worked beside Thomas in the fields. I was 7 years old. I had no bedroom of my own. I slept on a pallet in the kitchen near the stove in winter and on the floor in summer. I had 2 dresses, both second-hand and too large. I had 1 pair of shoes that I was allowed to wear only to church, on Sundays. The rest of the time I went barefoot, even in winter, when the floors were so cold they hurt my feet. I was fed scraps from their table. I ate after they finished whatever was left. Sometimes there was bread and butter. Sometimes there was nothing but potato peelings. I was always hungry. I learned to eat fast, to take what I could before it was gone. They called me girl, not by my name. They never used my name. Only girl. Girl, fetch the water. Girl, mend this shirt. Girl, you are too slow. My name was Catherine. I was 7 years old and they called me girl, as if I had no other identity worth speaking. I worked from before dawn until after dark. In summer, that meant 16 hours of labor. My hands blistered and then hardened. My back ached all the time from bending in the fields and leaning over the wash tub. I was always tired. I fell asleep over my supper more than once and was struck for laziness. They beat me when I did not work fast enough or well enough. Thomas used his belt. Harriet used a wooden spoon, or whatever was near. They never hit my face because that might cause questions at church, but my back, arms, and legs were bruised often. I tell these facts plainly because that is how I learned to think of them. To feel the full weight of what was done to me would have broken me, so I learned not to feel. I learned to be numb, to be empty, to be nothing but a body that worked and obeyed and survived. That numbness saved my life, but it cost me something I have never gained back. I attended school one winter when I was 8 years old. The teacher noticed I was behind and offered to give me extra lessons. I was learning to read slowly and with effort, but in the spring, Thomas said, I was needed on the farm. I never returned to school. I never learned to read well. To this day, reading is slow and hard for me. I can make out words, but books are beyond me. The Brennan took me to church every Sunday. They wanted to appear as good Christian people, giving a home to an orphan. The church people believed they were generous and kind. No one asked if I was treated well. No one asked me anything. I was expected to sit quietly beside Harriet, sing hymns, bow my head in prayer, and feel thankful. I was not thankful. I was not anything. I was hollow, working and obeying, and surviving without hope and without future. When I was 12, the Brennan took in another orphan train child, a boy named Peter, aged 10. I believe they took him because I was growing older and not as useful for heavy field work Thomas required. Peter was young and strong and eager to please, desperate for approval as many orphan train children were. Peter worked in the fields with Thomas. I continued with house and garden work. Peter and I rarely spoke. We were too tired at the end of each day, and speaking might have reminded us we were human. Remembering we were human made the pain sharper. It was easier to be nothing. Peter ran away when he was 12 after 2 years with the Brennan. He disappeared one morning and took nothing but the clothes he wore. Thomas went after him, but Peter knew the land by then and knew where to hide. He was never found. I hoped he reached somewhere better. I hoped he lived. I never knew if he did. After Peter left, Thomas said they would get another boy, but Harriet argued against it. She said boys ran away and caused trouble. Girls stayed. She said girls could be trusted to work and obey. So they kept me and I stayed because I had nowhere else to go and no way to reach it. I was with the Brennan for 11 years from age 7 to age 18. 11 years of labor, 11 years of beatings, 11 years of being called girl and treated as less than human. 11 years of learning that I had no value except the work I could do. The days were the same. I woke before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. While Thomas and Harriet ate, I stood waiting in case they needed anything. After they finished, I ate what was left, sometimes a crust of bread with butter, sometimes nothing but cold porridge. Then I cleaned the kitchen, washed dishes, swept the floor, and began the long work of the day. In summer, that meant tending the garden, feeding animals, helping with washing, and working in the fields during planting and harvest. I planted corn and worked until my hands bled and the sun went down, and then I rose the next morning to do it all again. Wheat beside Thomas. My small hands pushed seeds down into the dirt. My back bent for long hours without rest. When harvest came, I worked from sunrise until dark, cutting wheat with a sickle until my palms split and bled, loading heavy wagons until my legs shook and I could hardly stand. In winter, the labor moved inside, but it never became lighter. I churned butter until my arms ached deep in the bone. I patched clothing by the weak light of a dim lamp, squinting at tiny stitches until my eyes burned and watered. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees, the icy water turning my fingers red, stiff, and numb. I carried water from the well again and again, bucket after bucket, the rough rope biting into my skin. I emptied chamber pots, cleaned the privy, washed sheets, stained with things no child should ever have to see. Harriet watched over my work with endless fault-finding. The bread was never white enough. The butter was never firm enough. The floors were never clean enough. The sewing was never neat enough. Nothing I did pleased her. I learned quickly that praise did not exist in that house, that I did not work to gain approval but only to escape punishment. The punishments came oft. If I cracked a dish, I was hit with a wooden spoon. If I spilled milk, I was sent to bed without supper. If I moved too slowly in the fields, Thomas used his belt. If I showed any feeling at all, tears, anger, even happiness, I was called dramatic and ungrateful, and denied food. I learned to show nothing. I learned to work with my face empty, my body moving through chores like a machine, my thoughts shut down. I became what they wished me to be, a tool that labored and obeyed and asked for nothing in return. The nights were the worst of all. I slept on a thin pallet in the kitchen. After the Brennan family had gone upstairs, I could hear them speaking in their bedroom. I could hear Harriet complaining about me, hear Thomas agreeing that I was slow and foolish and barely worth keeping. I lay there in the dark, listening to them talk about me as if I were livestock, as if I were a broken piece of equipment that failed to do its job. I thought about running away. Every child on that farm dreamed of running. But where could I go? I was 10 miles from town, had no money, knew no one at all. I have released 14 complete recordings that will never appear on YouTube. These are voices too private, too raw to share in public, completely unedited, nothing removed. If you want to hear them, the link is in the description. It is called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us continue making these stories. All right, back to it. I had no family left to return to, no home that would welcome me. Running away meant hunger in the woods or sleeping in the streets. Staying meant survival, even if it did not feel like living, so I stayed. And with each day I stayed, something inside me faded. The child I once was, the girl who remembered her mother singing, who had played with her brothers and sisters, who had laughed and cried and felt real, who was man feelings. That child slowly vanished. In her place stood only the worker, the servant, the empty girl who existed to labor. When I turned 17, a neighbor boy named Samuel began to notice me. He saw me at church, smiled shyly, tried to speak a few words. Harriet saw this and forbade me from talking to him. She said I was too young, that I had duties to the Brennans, that I owed them my labor. She did not say plainly that I owed them for taking me in, but it was understood. I was a debt to be repaid with service. Samuel did not give up. He worked on his family's farm down the road. He was 19, with little future to promise, but he was gentle, and he spoke to me as though I mattered, as though I were more than hired help. In the spring of 1875, when I was 18, he asked me to marry him. I agreed, not from love. I did not understand love. I said yes, because marriage meant freedom, and I would have accepted any hand that led me away from that house. Thomas and Harriet were angry beyond words. They called me ungrateful, said that after all they had done, I was abandoning them without help. They claimed I still owed them years of service, that taking me in had cost them dearly, that I had not labored enough to repay their kindness. I looked at Thomas Brennan and spoke the only defiant words I ever dared in 11 years. I told him he had chosen me from that train because he wanted free work. He had received 11 years of it. He owed me nothing, and I owed him nothing. Then I walked out and never returned. Samuel and I married in April 1875. I was 18. We moved on to a small farm his father allowed us to work. 40 acres, barely enough to live on. We worked side by side. It was hard, exhausting labor, but it was ours, and that changed everything. I tried to be a good wife. Samuel treated me kindly, never raised a hand against me. Yet I did not cane. How to be a wife, how to be a wife, how to be anything other than someone who worked. I had learned to survive, not to feel. I had learned obedience, not love. He deserved more than I could offer, but he never spoke a complaint. Our first child came in 1876, a daughter we named Sarah. I was 19. When the midwife placed her in my arms, I felt nothing at all. I knew I should feel love, should feel warmth, but there was only emptiness. I cared for Sarah because caring for a child was work, and I understood work. I fed her, changed her, kept her safe and warm. But I did not rock her unless necessary. I did not sing. I did not play. I did not know how. I had not truly been a child myself. Samuel noticed the difference. He held Sarah often, talked to her softly, made her laugh. I watched and understood something inside me was missing. When she was a year old, she reached for me one afternoon. I picked her up stiffly, unsure how to hold her, confused by her small, warm body. She began to cry and stretched her arms toward her father. When Samuel took her, she quieted at once, pressing her face into his shoulder. I knew then that even my baby sensed the distance in me. When our son was born 2 years later, I hoped it might change. It did not. I did what was required, but warmth did not come. He cried often, and Samuel spent long hours walking the floor, soothing him with a tenderness I could not find within myself. The twins arrived when I was 23, 2 daughters at once, twice the work. I kept them clean, fed, alive. But I could only tell them apart by their dresses. I did not feel that deep bond mothers speak of. They were duties added to a list that never ended. As they grew older, the children went to their father for comfort and play. They came to me for rules and chores. They learned that I did not laugh, did not hug them good night. They learned not to expect affection. Once Sarah asked why I never held her hand like other mothers did. I told her to finish eating and stop asking foolish questions. She never asked again. Thomas once climbed into my lap after scraping his knee. I sat rigid and unsure. After a moment he slipped away to find Samuel. I felt relief, then shame for feeling it. The twins learned early not to come to me at all. I knew they deserved tenderness, but I did not know how to give what had been beaten out of me during those 11 years. My own mother's love was only a faint memory from when I was 6, too distant to guide me. So my children grew with a mother who was there, but not truly present, who cared for their bodies, but not their hearts. They became responsible and independent because they had no choice. We had 3 more children, a son named Thomas in 1878, and twin girls, Mary and Alice, in 1880. I raised them the same way, with duty and order and work. Love did not come. I had none left to offer. Samuel died in 1895 at 40 years old, taken by pneumonia after a cold storm caught him in the fields. I was 38, alone with 4 children and a farm. I did what I always did. I worked. I planted and harvested. I endured. The children grew and left one after another. Sarah married in 1896. Thomas went west in 1900. The twins married in 1903. They built lives of their own. They visit now and then, bringing their children. I sit quietly and watch my grandchildren play, wondering what stories they hear about their silent grandmother, who rarely smiles, who does not wrap them in her arms, who observes but does not join. 2 years ago, in 1921, Sarah came to see me. She was 45, with grown children herself. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked me why I had never loved her. She asked if I had ever wanted her at all. She asked me if she had been a bad child, if she had done something wrong, if I had ever truly cared for her at all. I could not give her an answer. How could I explain something I did not fully understand myself? How could I tell her that her grandmother had been sold like cattle at the age of 7, beaten and starved and forced to work until she felt empty of everything human, until she learned that the only way to survive was to feel nothing at all, because feeling only brought pain? How could I tell her that I had tried to love her but simply did not know how, that 11 long years with the Brennan family had hollowed me out and left nothing inside except the ability to labor and endure? I am now 66 years old. I have lived most of my years after leaving the Brennan house. But those 11 years, from age 7 to 18, shaped everything that followed. They decided who I became, what I was able to give, what I was able to feel. I think often about the Children's Aid Society, about the orphan trains, about the promises they made to the public. They claimed they were rescuing us, saving us from the streets and the crowded tenements of New York. They said good Christian families wished to provide homes for homeless children. They never said we would be used like unpaid servants. They never said we would be beaten, starved, and treated as less than human. They never said we would be separated from our brothers and sisters and scattered across the country with no way to find one another again. I think about Thomas and Harriet Brennan. They never adopted me. I was not their daughter. I was their servant, bound to them by law, until I reached adulthood. They could have returned me if I had not satisfied them, but I never gave them reason. I worked hard enough, endured quietly enough, survived well enough to remain useful. I often wonder what became of my siblings. Margaret would be 68 now if she is still alive. My brothers would be 64 and 62. My baby sister would be 60. I have no way to find them, no way to know if they lived or died, if they were treated kindly or cruelly, if they survived their placements or were crushed by them. I have spent 50 years wondering. When I could afford it, I placed small notices in newspapers asking for information about Margaret, Patrick, James, and little Anna, my siblings, taken from the Orphan Train in 1864. I never once received a reply. Either they passed away, or they changed their names, or they simply do not wish to be found. I suspect the last is most likely. Why would anyone want to remember being an orphan train child? Why would anyone wish to return to that past? I think of Margaret often. She was 8 years old when they took her at the first stop in New York State. She tried to be a mother to the rest of us, trying to keep us together. She held little Anna when she cried. She braided my hair as the train moved along the tracks. She promised that one day we would find each other again. She was only 8, making promises she had no power to keep. I wonder if Margaret was chosen by a family who truly wanted a daughter. I wonder if she was loved, if she grew into a happy woman, if she had children of her own who called her mother with warmth and affection. I pray that is true. I hope at least one of us found real love. I hope at least one of us was not broken as I was broken. Patrick and James were 4 and 2 when they were taken in Ohio. They were too young to remember much of our life before that. They may not even remember they had sisters. They may not remember our mother's face. Perhaps that is a mercy. Perhaps forgetting is easier than remembering and never finding what was lost. Little Anna was barely more than a year old when a couple took her in Indiana. She surely does not remember us. She does not remember our mother. She does not remember being one of 6 children. Whoever raised her became her mother in truth. I hope they were gentle with her. I hope she had a real childhood, full of laughter and love. I hope she was not worked the way I was worked, though I will never know. The Children's Aid Society kept no clear records of where children were placed. They left no proper system for families to reconnect. We were scattered like seeds blown by the wind, and whether we grew strong or withered away, no one cared enough to follow our stories. We were a problem that had been removed, and what happened afterward was no longer their concern. Sometimes I dream of them. I dream of Margaret grown and living somewhere in New York or Pennsylvania with children of her own. I dream of my brother's farming land in Ohio, strong and capable, having survived their placements. I dream of Anna, beautiful and content, unaware that she once had siblings who still think of her. In my dreams we are all alive. We all survived. We all built lives for ourselves despite what was done to us. But dreams are not reality. The truth is, I do not know if any of them lived beyond childhood. Many orphan train children did not. They died from illness, accidents, exhaustion, or abuse. They were buried in unmarked graves on distant farms, far from anyone who knew their names or cared that they had once lived. I think about searching harder, about hiring someone to investigate, or placing more newspaper notices, but I am 66 years old and so very tired. I have spent half a century searching. If they had wanted to find me, they could have placed notices too. Perhaps they did, and I never saw them. Perhaps they never tried. Perhaps I am the only one who still remembers, still wonders, still grieves the family torn apart in 1864. I think about the system that took poor children from the city and distributed them to farmers who needed free labor. The Children's Aid Society said they were offering opportunity. In truth, they were supplying workers. Some families must have treated children kindly. I believe that. Some must have offered real homes and real affection, but many did not. Many took children for the same reason the Brennan family took me, because children could work, and orphaned children cost nothing except food and shelter. I wonder how many of us there truly were. The orphan trains operated from 1854 to 1929. Thousands of children, perhaps tens of thousands, were scattered across the Midwest and the West. How many were treated as I was? How many grew up believing their only value was in labor, that love was an illusion, that family meant duty and work instead of warmth and belonging? How many, like me, survived but never truly lived? How many married and had children and carried on the appearance of normal life while feeling empty inside? How many failed their own children because they had been so deeply broken that they could not give what they had never received? I am 66 years old, and I live alone now in a small house in town, no longer strong enough to farm. My children send money when they are able. They are dutiful, though not affectionate. I taught them duty, if not tenderness. That is the inheritance I gave them. Responsibility without warmth, survival without joy, endurance without hope. Every day I think about the life I might have had if my father had lived, if my mother had survived, if the city had not gathered us up and placed us on that train. Perhaps I would have grown up poor in New York, but at Lee State I would have grown up beside my brothers and sisters. Perhaps I would have learned to read well, would have made friends, would have known what it meant to be a child at play instead of a child at play. But such thoughts change nothing. What happened is done. I was on that train. I was selected by the Brennan family. I spent 11 years learning to be nothing more than a worker. That lesson followed me for the rest of my life. People now speak of the orphan trains as if they were a great charitable mission, as if the Children's Aid Society rescued children from terrible fates. Perhaps some were rescued, but many of us were simply moved from one kind of hardship to another. We were taken from city streets where we were poor and unwanted, and placed on farms where we were poor and exploited. In the city we at least had one another. On the farms we were alone, isolated with no witness to our treatment, no one to report cruelty, no one to care if we lived or died. As long as we worked, we were kept. I survived. That is my achievement, my quiet victory. I survived 11 years with the Brennan family. I survived separation from my siblings. I survived without proper schooling. I survived marriage and childbirth and raising children while feeling nothing but duty inside. I survived widowhood and the long years alone. I survived carrying the weight of those 11 years every single day. But survival is not living. I have never truly lived. I have endured, persisted, existed. But I have never known real joy, never known deep peace, never felt that I belonged anywhere for who I was, rather than what I could do. I think about what living might have meant. I think about mothers holding their babies and feeling their hearts overflow with love. I think about wives mourning their husbands with tears and true sorrow. I think about grandmothers who delight in their grandchildren. I think about women who share laughter and secrets with friends over tea. I have not known those things. I have moved through life like a shadow, present but not fully alive, attending births and funerals and celebrations, yet always standing apart, acting my part, without feeling it. The Brennan family did not only take 11 years of my childhood, they took the rest of my life as well. They took my ability to feel deeply, to connect, to be fully human. They took something that can never be returned or repaired, and they did so legally, with the support of the Children's Aid Society and the approval of the community. That is what still angers me. Not only that it happened, but that it was praised as charity. The Children's Aid Society told the Brennans they were doing a good deed. The church congratulated them on their kindness. The neighbors admired them for giving a home to an orphan. No one asked if I was fed enough. No one asked if I was taught to read. No one asked if I was taught to read. No one asked if I was safe or if I was loved. No one asked questions because I was property, legally tied to the Brennan family, until I reached adulthood. What they did with me was considered their affair, not something society cared to see. I often think about how many others were like me. The orphan trains ran for 75 years and carried 250,000 children. How many were truly loved and cared for? How many were truly loved and cared for? How many were forced to work, beaten, and slowly destroyed? How many survived yet never truly lived? I think about the records of the Children's Aid Society. They carefully wrote down how many children were sent west, which trains carried them, and which towns they stopped in, but they did not record where each child finally ended up, who claimed them, or what became of them. We were freight, successfully delivered. What happened to the freight after delivery was not their concern. I think about T. Charles Loring Brace, who founded the Children's Aid Society and believed he was rescuing children from the streets. Maybe he believed that with all his heart. Maybe he truly thought that sending children west to labor on farms was kinder than leaving them in crowded city tenements. Perhaps he was right for some. But for me, I would have rather stayed in that dark tenement with my mother until she passed. I would have rather died beside her of consumption at 7 than to have lived this life. At least I would have died knowing I was loved, knowing I belonged to someone, knowing I had a name and an identity beyond girl and worker. Instead, I lived, I endured, and I have spent 59 years wishing that I had not. That is not what people want to hear. People want survival stories to be inspiring. They want to believe I rose above my suffering, that I flourished despite hardship, that I shaped something beautiful from pain. But my story is not that story. My story is that I was shattered and remained shattered, that I survived, but at such a heavy price that survival hardly feels worth praising. The Brennan did not kill my body, but they killed me all the same. They killed what made me human and left me walking through 6 decades like a body that had forgotten how to die. That is what the Brennan stole from me. Not only 11 years of childhood, though they stole those. Not only my schooling, though they stole that as well. They took my ability to feel deeply, to trust another soul, to love without fear, to be fully human. They damaged something inside me that never mended, that could not mend, that I carried like an open wound all my life. I look at my hands now, aged and bent with arthritis, and I see the hands that labored from 7 years old until they could labor no more. I look at my face in the mirror, lined and stern, and I see the face that learned to show and othing to feel nothing, to exist only as obedient and useful. I think about the child I was before my parents died, before the orphanage, before the train ride west. I hold only faint memories of that little girl. I remember my mother singing when she was not too weary. I remember my father laughing once before drink consumed him. I remember playing with Margaret, both of us pretending we were fine ladies in beautiful dresses. Those memories are pale and far away, as if they belonged to another life. That child disappeared on the orphan train, or soon after. She was replaced by girl, by worker, by a thing that lived only to serve. And that is who I have been for 59 years. I am told I should feel thankful. I am told the Brennan gave me shelter when I had none, fed me when I would have starved, clothed me when I had nothing. I am told I should thank God I was not left on the streets of New York to die of illness or hunger. I am not thankful. I cannot be grateful for 11 years of slavery in all but name. 11 years of learning that I had value only as labor. 11 years of beatings, cold nights, empty stomach, and deep loneliness. I cannot be thankful for losing my siblings, for losing my childhood, for losing my ability to feel human closeness. If I had remained on the streets of New York, I might have died young, but I would have died as Catherine, as my mother's child, as a sister to my siblings. I would have died as someone with a name and a self. Instead, I lived as girl, as worker, as nothing, and I have been nothing ever since. People do not understand when I speak this way. They say the past is gone, that I should release it, that clinging to old pain changes nothing. They do not understand that I am not clinging to it. It is clinging to me. It shaped my bones and spirit, formed who I became. I cannot release it any more than I can remove my own skeleton. And I sometimes think about Thomas and Harriet Brennan. They would be in their 90s now if they still breathe. I have heard nothing of them in decades. I have not gone back to that part of Illinois. I have not tried to learn their fate. I hope they are gone. I hope their ending was not peaceful. I hope they felt suffering. These are not holy thoughts, but I have never felt particularly holy. After all those years, sitting in their church pew, pretending to pray, I think about forgiveness and whether I should grant it for what they did. People say forgiveness would free me, would let me move forward, would bring peace. I do not want to forgive them. They do not merit forgiveness. They took a 7-year-old child and worked her like livestock for 11 years. They beat her, starved her, denied her schooling, denied her humanity. To forgive would mean what they did was excusable or understandable. It was not. I am 66 years old now. I will not see many more years. My health declines and my body is worn down from 6 decades of hard toil. When I pass, I suppose my children will come to bury me. They will do their duty. They will pray over my grave and mark it with a plain stone. Then they will return to their homes and continue their lives, perhaps relieved that the cold and distant old woman is no longer there. I wonder if one day they will understand why I was the way I was. I wonder if Sarah will ever realize that her question about why I never loved her has an answer both simple and terrible. I could not love her because love had been beaten out of me before I even knew its shape. I could not give what I never received. What I was taught did not exist. I sometimes wonder what might have happened if the Children's Aid Society had kept stronger records, had tried to keep brothers and sisters together, had supervised placements to ensure children were safe. I wonder what might have happened if someone had checked on me during those 11 years, had asked if I was well, had noticed bruises, hunger, or the absence of schooling. No one came. The orphan train children were sent west and forgotten. The society believed its duty ended once we were placed. What followed was another person's burden. Or more truthfully, no one's burden. I suspect I am one, among thousands, with similar stories, not identical, some worse, some kinder, but all carrying the weight of being orphan-trained children, of being chosen like cattle, of being worked and used and damaged in ways both great and small. We are scattered now, aged and fading, taking our stories to our graves. Few will remember what it was like, what was done, what was lost. What was done, what was lost. That is why I speak now, not for sympathy or praise, not because it will change history, but because someone should know. Someone should understand what the orphan trains meant for children like me. They were not rescue, they were not simple charity, they were a system of unpaid labor, and we were the laborers. Chosen and used until worn thin. I was 7 when I stepped onto that train. I am 66 now. Those 11 years with the Brennan shaped the next 50. They left me unable to be a loving wife, a warm mother, a gentle grandmother. They left me able only to work and endure and survive. That is not enough for a full life, but it is the life I had. Now, at the end, I look back and see years of labor without purpose, endurance without hope, survival without meaning. I see a woman broken at 7 and never restored. I see a woman who became exactly what Thomas and Harriet Brennan desired. A worker who asked nothing and expected nothing and expected nothing and received nothing. I survived. That is my achievement. I survived when many did not. Yet I have asked myself countless times if survival was worth its cost. If it would have been better to die in that New York tenement beside my mother and siblings than to live 66 years unable to feel, unable to love, unable to be whole. I have no answer. I only know that I survived and have carried the weight of that survival every day since, and I will carry it with me into my grave whenever that hour comes. The Brennan may be finished with me, but I am not finished with them. They live in every numb feeling, in every failure to connect, in every hollow space inside me. That is what slavery does, whether it bears that name or another. It turns a human soul into a tool, a worker, a thing. Even when the bondage ends, the harm remains. I am free now. I have been free for 48 years, yet I will never be free from what those 11 years carved into me. This is my testimony. This is my truth. This is the story of Catherine, an orphan trained child taken at 7, worked like a slave for 11 years, and broken in ways that never healed. I tell it not for pity but for truth, so that someone knows what was done, to how many, and at what terrible cost.